my name is Gertrude, and welcome back to the Tech Girl podcast. Today's episode starts with a simple but very powerful idea. What if creating better workplaces doesn't start by choosing between flexibility and structure, but learning to hold both? My guest, Whitney Simone. She's a culture strategist and founder of Anchor and Flow, where she helps organizations move beyond performative inclusion into something more real, more human, and honestly, more uncomfortable. In this conversation, we talk about why D&I programs often fail, the courage it takes to start to work in moments of fear, and why there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to people and culture as an approach. At the heart of the conversation is that real change doesn't start with the program, it starts with the conversation. Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tech Girl podcast with me, your host, Gertrude. Today, I am really excited about my guest. Her name is Whitney Simone, and she's a culture strategist, a founder, and a voice building workplaces rooted in both accountability and care. We're going to hear a lot about Anchor plus Flow. I hope that's how it goes, Anchor plus Flow. Let's just get into it. Welcome, Whitney.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Awesome. Whenever I speak to founders, entrepreneurs, creators, and everything, I'm always stuck at the name of whatever they are building or creating. So when I saw Anchor plus Floor, I was like, this is truly interesting because one implies stability and the other movement. Yeah. Why did you choose the name that holds like both sort of tension and balance? And how does it reflect the work that you do?
Yeah, I totally hear you. I feel as though when I was trying to conceive the name of the business, there's just so much to it, right? It's like the first thing that people see when they're engaging with your brand. And so you really want it to have an impact and to resonate with, different folks, around the world and different sectors, things like that. And Anchor and Flow, it's interesting. It came to me because of music. I have a musical background, and I think there's something so powerful in how music can evoke feeling. It can evoke change. It can, really resonate with people regardless of where you're from, your background. But there's also something that's so interesting because there's like paradox in music, right? Of course, you have to have kind of the notes that you're anchoring the music into, but then there also has to be some creativity and freedom in how you interpret the music. And I think it's the same thing with diversity. I feel as though diversity, workplace culture, we tend to try to be so fixed in how we approach these things, but in essence, people, culture, it's constantly evolving and flowing. And I think we saw with kind of the D&I backlash, we can't keep doing the same things, using the same approaches when it comes to addressing organizational culture, diversity, equity, inclusion in a world that's constantly changing. And so with Anchor and Flow, part of the vision was to help reassure people that yes, there are some key fundamentals, there's key tenets that we should approach when it comes to creating a workplace that fosters and supports people from all different backgrounds, but also giving a bit of grace and recognizing that the landscape is constantly evolving. Like there is no one size fits all. There's no end point to this journey because we as humans are constantly changing and evolving. So the name was to, I guess, reinforce the idea that I want to give people that foundation, that structure, while also giving them the space and the grace to recognize that like this is going to look different, in the first month of working together or in, the third year of working together.
Yeah, absolutely. I had no idea that it was also a play with music. In my head, it was like something to do with water and thing like that.
I love it, honestly. And that's the beauty of it too, right? Like everyone has different interpretations. And ultimately for me is if you say, hey, that was really interesting. I was like thinking about that name and what it meant. That for me is really powerful because it's okay, it just stuck with you. And that can lead to conversations. And I think it's probably at the root of the work that I do where it's it's understanding that everyone is going to interpret, going to look at things in a different way. That's not something we should shy away from. If anything, we should embrace it because it can
Mhm.
lead us to new perspectives and new points that we probably didn't expect to ever, come across.
Totally. And from what I see, like anchor plus flow, and I hear you say anchor and flow. Does it really matter whether it's anchor plus flow or anchor and flow?
Your interpretation, I'm happy with either. And you actually said anchor plus flow, and I was like, that's a new interpretation. So yeah.
Okay, we'll go with anchor and flow. Yeah. Where you help organizations move beyond sort of performative inclusion, and it's span out from missive in 2025, right? Where you coded the year of backlash and hate growing louder in our sectors.
Yeah.
What made you decide that that was the moment to sort of go independent and go even deeper into this?
If I'm being honest, I think it
Mm,
was how scared I was about doing it
mhm,
that made me realize that it was important to do so. It, I think it can feel really demoralizing and overwhelming to look at the state of the world, especially, as a Black queer woman. I think every time I would look at the news or talk to my family in the States or just see what's happening in the wider world, I just felt so helpless and a lot of guilt as well because I recognize that I have a lot of privilege and, um, having whatever an American passport means now, but historically there's a lot of privilege in that. Having family that supports me and my vision and the things that I want, and a lot of people don't have that. And I recognize that I could either keep sitting in that helplessness or in that feeling of guilt, like I wish I could do more, or I could actually do something and not in a way where, I mean, I always say this, I don't think that I'm going to see the change that I hope to enact in my lifetime, and that's okay. If I can create even one bit of change in my local area or with people in my network in my community, that's power. Um, and so I recognize that when things feel the hardest, feel the darkest, when it feels most helpless, those are the opportunities to really lean into, well, I said that I want to do something, so I'm going to do something, even if it is really scary. Because I think now more than ever, we need more people that want to have really honest and sometimes difficult conversations, who want to, you know, get beneath the surface and actually talk about what is all of this rooted in? Like, what are the things that are driving so much hate? Why are we seeing backlash against D&I? Something that was, ideally something to bring us together, but in recent years, we've seen that it's kind of pulled people apart. So yeah, I think Anchor and Flow came at a time when I was the most scared, but I recognized that fear could be used as a tool to try to push myself and challenge myself to do what I can to make some kind of change, even if it's on a really small scale.
It's a large scale, honestly, because the impact goes a long way. I mean, when you talk to leaders and in the organizations that you speak, that message moves beyond the organization, I believe, because it then goes into their families. Like we had this, and it's a movement, and I'm so inspired by the work that you're doing. It's so amazing. Yeah. Yeah. You said that it also came from a place of fear.
Mm.
If you look back to that moment, what did you think in your mind, what was the worst thing that could happen if you didn't do something?
I guess the my one of my biggest fears is that I look back and regret the things that I didn't do. And you hear that all the time, right? People don't often regret the things they do, they regret the things that they didn't do. And I had
Mhm.
gotten to a point in my career. So my background's in public relations. So I worked at a number of different PR agencies in the States, and then I moved to the UK and I worked in PR agencies in London. Um, and PR is a really interesting industry in that, ideally we are the people that are telling the stories, that are communicating, the brands that are changing the world, the people that are influencing those brands, etc. And yet I was constantly in these spaces where I was the only like Black person, not even person of color. And in the States, it was really traumatic, especially because it was, I studied a degree in public relations. And so I went into this agency or agencies thinking, okay, this is it. Like I can change, the world by telling really powerful stories. And I kept coming into these situations where my voice was not heard, or my voice was always pushed off to the side, or I was told I wasn't good enough. I wasn't able to blend in. I was too different, whatever. And I kept thinking that maybe it was just the agency. I just needed to change the agency. So I went through periods of time where I would be at an agency for about a year and then go to a next one thinking this one will be better. Eventually I moved to the UK, and at that point I'd had such like a terrible experience in agency world that I was like, I'm not going to do this again. But moving to a new country, it's actually really difficult to make friends unless you go to work. So I went back into the agency world, and this time around it was very different because I am not Black British, and obviously like I have a different kind of background in terms of like, okay, I'm an American coming into this country, so there's certain privileges that come with that. And I found that my experience with PR was a bit better, but I still kept getting to that point where I just felt like really just disenchanted and frustrated. And I recognize that I keep putting myself in different situations, but it's like still the same parameters, thinking it'll change, and it doesn't. And so I got to this point where I was like, maybe I need to stop putting myself in the same situation. I need to put myself in a different situation and see how that works. And I think in looking back on all my agency experience, reflecting on the things that brought me the most joy, it was always working with the organizations, nonprofits that were trying to get more people of color into the tech sector. We're trying to highlight and champion people from diverse backgrounds. That was the work that really just brought me alive. And it was part of the reason why I launched the D&I consulting division, because I found we'd be creating these campaigns for these brands, and it was speaking to one specific group. And it was like, but it's more than just, white cisgender people that are using your product or, engaging with your platform. We have people from completely different backgrounds, and you're neglecting them. And so I think it was reflecting on kind of the past, however many years in PR, the things that brought me joy. And then I just had this moment where I was like, oh, it's the work around culture, D&I, that really brings me like great joy. And I need to explore that a bit more, even if it is terrifying.
And you're doing the thing, which is amazing.
Girl, I'm trying. I mean, but the same with you. Like, there is so much power in creating spaces for people to share their story. I think I grew up, it's so funny looking at like the media landscape. I grew up never seeing, a Black queer, like plus size woman on the television screen. So I was just like, oh, I'm not attractive. I'm not smart. I'm not main character energy. And it's only now in my 30s, I'm looking and I'm like, oh, I'm seeing queer women. I'm seeing Black women. I'm seeing women with natural hair, and they are beautiful. They are smart. They are the main energy. And representation is so important. And having those spaces to tell those stories means so much. So, right back at you, girl. Like, you're doing the thing. And like the next generation of people being like, I can run podcasts where I talk to people from around the world and have them share their story. It's really powerful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And I completely agree. A lot of people underestimate the power of representation. And sometimes I tend to challenge them in the aspect of, if you don't see that representation is important, it's probably because you are already represented. Because when you're
Mm.
not, you feel it, you know it. And yeah, so I really agree with you on that one. Um, now, let's talk a little bit about how you've moved in different locations and how that has impacted your life and your work. You've lived in Boston, San Francisco, and now London,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
How has that shaped your context around race, identity, inclusion? How does it look like in the different spaces? because sometimes when you talk about race and identity plus inclusion, a lot of people will think it's the same thing, where I believe context really matters. Do you see any differences?
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think when I when you're in the States, like, and rightfully so, right? As humans, as individuals, we are very focused on our experience. We think our experience is the most important because it's our experience. I think leaving the States just made me realize that, like, in America, being black is such a big thing. It's when you walk into a room, the first thing that people notice is your race. And then it's really hard to shake anything else. And the conversations around diversity focus a lot on race. And so when I moved to the UK, I very much came at it from that perspective. And then interestingly, what I found is that my race wasn't the first thing that people noticed about me. If anything, the first thing that they noticed about me was that I was American. And it was more than just even me speaking, it was just the way that I entered a room. Americans can be are very proud or very loud or, aren't scared to kind of take up space. Um, and I would be in these situations where I was so used to feeling as though everyone was focused on my race, but I'd be in these situations where people are like, oh no, you're American. And that gave me a level of grace and privilege that I hadn't been used to. It took me a moment to recognize, oh, I'm actually really privileged in the UK. And then kind of exploring and meeting, Black British folks, recognizing, oh, my experience is completely different to their experience. Even though on the surface of things, you'd look at us and be like, oh, they're both Black. And it's like, but no. And so it really helped me recognize that, like, context, as you said, is so important. And also recognizing that race is just one parameter. In the States, we focus on, like, Black people, white people. But when we're talking about, the UK or Europe, we're talking about, Caribbean people, people from Africa. We're talking about people from South Asia, East Asia. We're talking about, class, which is something that is a bit different than in the States. And all of those things kind of intersect. So the conversation is more nuanced, is richer. And so I really had to take a step back and recognize that my perspective was pretty one-sided, one note, and that I had to really start studying and engaging and understanding how culturally racism, sexism, classism manifests completely differently than in the US. And it's also to recognize that just because the way that the US, and this is something you brought up in your chat with Lily that I thought was super interesting, just because the US has a certain approach when it comes to D&I or workplace culture, or like creating, groups of like cohesion and inclusion and things like that, it doesn't mean that it's the right way. It doesn't mean that it's the best way. It just means it's the American way. And when you move into, different countries, you recognize that, like, you can't just pick up a plan and try to retrofit it for a whole new, I mean, if I'm being honest, continent. And one example, I remember when I was working in public relations, we would work with an agency that was based in the UK. And it was so interesting because at the time, what we would do is we would take the US approach and just be like, oh, yeah, use that in Europe. Europe is a whole continent. We're talking about the UK, France, like all these different countries. And we just had this, like, this idea that we could just take this approach and retrofit it for all these different countries. And then I moved to the UK and I was working with these UK brands or in French brands and all these different brands. And I was like, oh my God, we were so, like, conceited in that approach because Americans are all like big smiles. Let's be like super loud, super proud. And British culture is completely different. It's like, oh, we are a bit more reserved or a bit quiet. Like, we don't necessarily want to, like, brag about ourselves that much. Then you go into France and it's like, okay, they speak a whole different language. Like, what's culturally relevant here is not relevant there. And so it was just a big learning for me, but I think it's also changed my life in such an amazing way because it made me realize that there is still so much to learn, and there really is no endpoint, even for, a D&I practitioner or an HR person, a cultural strategist. Everything that we're doing, we constantly need to be open to the idea that we have to unlearn a lot of the things that we did and continue evolving how we look at things, how we approach things. Um, so yeah, I feel like this is a long-winded way, but it's just fundamentally changed my life and my perspective on things to recognize that even though I'm the center of my experience, it doesn't mean that that experience speaks to other people. Maybe there's some overlap, but there has to be an acknowledgement of that, you know, the world is so much bigger than us. And we need to broaden that perspective.
Definitely. And it's always the case when people talk about like the Black experience.
Mm.
I like that word, but I'm also like, huh, yeah.
Like, what is a Black experience? Like, and it's funny because I never really felt like I fit into the Black community growing up because my family's from Haiti, from the Caribbean. And so, but when you talk about the Black experience, it's a very particular perspective. It's like Southern, so like rooted in like, descendants of like slaves. We're talking about like collard greens, like all these different cultural aspects that people would come to me and be like, "Oh yeah, so like you do this and you eat this." And I'm like, "No, I don't." Like that is not my point of reference. My family came from Haiti. So like a lot of these things that you see or that people would come to me and be like, "That's your experience." I'd be like, "No, it's not. Absolutely not." And that's the thing, right? And even sometimes our own people have that approach. Like I came in to the UK being like, Black British people, it's like all one and the same, very ignorantly. And then I was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah. Um, it's funny that you say that you're from Haiti and then there's this whole experience because I'm from Zambia, Africa, and for us, race is not a thing.
Mm.
I always tell people that I only realized that I'm Black when I moved to Sweden because that's not even something we talk about. We're talking about many other things than
Yeah.
race, but maybe that's because we're the majority there. Whereas he's like, so what is it like being a Black person? What is it like being from Africa? What is it like being someone from the global south? And I was always like, oh my God, I feel so unqualified to talk about
Right.
that. Yeah.
I'm like, I've just been living. I don't know. Like I know my experience and you're right. My mother-in-law is from Trinidad and actually there was this conversation she was having where she was like, I didn't really like I never really thought of myself as Black because everyone in Trinidad, for the most part, the majority was Black. It was only moving to the States where it was like, oh, I'm Black. And so it's like trying to recognize and acknowledge that that experience is fundamentally different from the experience of her daughter, my partner, who's like, oh no, I'm Black. So again, like the point you made was so spot on. Context is so important, nuance is so important, and it's one of the reasons why, like, for me, the flow element of anchor and flow is like what I tend to emphasize on because we have to recognize that binaries, like, it doesn't make any sense. No one is just one thing. No one stays one thing their whole life. Like, we need to be able to have those murky conversations that make us uncomfortable, but at the same time, it also challenges our thinking.
Definitely. And it's through those challenges and uncomfortable conversations that change eventually happens,
Mhm.
right? And your mission as well is to transform D&I from a program, just a program, into something that flows naturally through every organization, people as well. But then there's still a gap,
Mhm.
right? There's still a gap between the programs and what actually happens at the end of the day. Uh, what would you say companies should be doing in closing this gap?
It's a really good question. I would say probably the most important thing is creating the space to have uncomfortable conversations. I think organizations, people too, actually, we love to say that we're super understanding, we're super inclusive, we're this, we're that, we're the other thing. But then when we're actually faced with constructive feedback or pushback on our stances, or we're asked to actually demonstrate how we are inclusive and ally, things like that, we get really uncomfortable because then we have to take a step back and actually start to drill into am I doing what I say I'm doing, or am I just saying it without any real actions? And I see that a lot in organizations where it's like, we have an ERG, we have a woman on our board, uh, we put up a black square during the George Floyd murders, or we put up a rainbow during Pride Month. And then you go into the organization and you talk to people and you hear, a queer person's like, I don't feel comfortable talking about the fact that I'm trans because I feel as though there's a lot of like anti-trans rhetoric. There's not a lot of understanding. Or you have someone who's neurodiverse who's like, I actually can't stay at this organization because there's no accommodations that the organization's willing to make for me, but they're willing to make it for someone who is a mother or a carer. And so I find that there's that level of defensiveness when you're actually questioning and pushing back on an organization or on a person, where it's like, it's all well and good to say this, but what are the actions that you're taking? And if you're not taking the actions, why? And I think if organizations, if individuals took more time to sit with that discomfort, to sit with that acknowledgement of, you're right, I have been pretty performative. We did do this thing, and then that was it. We haven't built on it. We haven't challenged ourselves. We haven't really been open to conversations with people. Then I think that gives a really solid foundation to actually make change, because you're aware of where you've been falling down. You can't make change. You can't change as an individual if you're not willing to acknowledge, where you're not the best or you're not the greatest, where your weak spots are. Um, so that's something that I really try to focus on with organizations, where it's having those uncomfortable conversations. Some organizations, it takes a bit of work and then they get there, and there's some folks that aren't ready to have those conversations. And in that case, I mean, that is valid too. We also have to recognize, if, I'm championing being able to be flexible and being able to flow, we also have to recognize that people need to come to that point in their journey on their own. You can't force them, because, I mean, then again, it is just inherently performative if they're doing it for anything other than because they recognize it's important.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can see how those conversations can be difficult, and indeed some people do recognize, as you've mentioned, like, oh, okay, maybe we could do it differently, while others are like, we tried this and we tried that. Has there been a moment in your work where you were surprised? Let's say maybe you walked into an organization or spoke with people and maybe they were a bit more apprehensive, and then you started to talk to them and change happened or not. Had there been any moments where you were just surprised, or you went in thinking they're more flexible only to find no?
Yeah. I've had both sides. Like, I had a client that I work with in like a reverse mentoring capacity. Um, and so basically the whole kind of, with reverse mentoring, the goal is to kind of give leaders a space to talk about those really difficult conversations or things that they're apprehensive about in a safe space. And so I had this client who, in the first couple of sessions, she would talk about how she's just so nervous to say anything because she doesn't want to get it wrong, and she doesn't want to be perceived as a racist or as a bigot or things like that. And she was talking about an example of how she accidentally mispronounced someone's name. And she was going through the example and she was just saying, I felt so terrible. Like, it was so awful. I felt so bad. And then I was like, I don't know if I should talk to them again. Like, I really felt terrible. And I wanted them to know, like, it was just an honest mistake. And she finished talking and I was like, so in that whole example that you talked about, there was not one point where you actually talked about the other person. The whole story that you told me was about your discomfort. There wasn't an acknowledgement of that other person. It was just about you and what you were scared of, like, being perceived as. And she stopped and she was like, oh my God, you're so right. And I was like, honestly, that person would have probably been like, hey, it's okay. Like, mistakes happen. This is how it's pronounced. In the future, just remember that. Instead, we center ourselves, and we see this a lot with, like, majority or privileged backgrounds, where it's like that experience is centered so much that you're doing exactly what you're scared of doing. You're basically setting aside the experience of people from diverse backgrounds because all you're worried about is how you're perceived. And if instead she had just been like, I'm so sorry I messed up, it won't happen again. That conversation is so much better and actually shows that there's a level of humility and accountability and like, yeah, I messed up. I will do better next time. And so that was really interesting, that experience with her. And like subsequently, we went to an event where it was like an all white panel. And she turns to me. In my head, I was like, oh my God, this is an all white panel. These people are saying some interesting things. She turns to me, she's like, this is really problematic, right? And I was like, this is fantastic. um, that was one of my proudest moments. I was just like, I've never been prouder. And she was they really need to think about how they do this event in the future. And then there's been times I've gone into organizations where, again, it's like people are like, I'm really progressive, I'm really inclusive. But then when it comes to talking about different working generations and different working patterns, there's a lot of pushback. I think we're seeing something really interesting in the workforce where you have so many different age or different generations working together, and we're not doing enough to address it. So you have like the older, generation that's just like, this is how I came up in my career. This is what success is defined as. This is what work should be. And then you have the younger generations that are just like, I don't buy it. My life is more than my work. And for all the inclusiveness and inclusion, when this generation is trying to exercise their right to be like, I want to set boundaries, people get really uncomfortable. Um, and so again, like those are always really interesting conversations because I'm also like, well, not for nothing, I respect Gen Z for being like, I'm not going to sell my soul for this company because in 6 months from now, they'll let me go and they won't even think about it. My life needs to be more than this. I get it. It's not how I came up, but we have to also acknowledge the context has changed. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Precisely. I like that you mentioned the different generations in the workplace because that has also become such a huge challenge for organizations when it comes to team dynamics and executing when it comes to their work because the younger generation, like you mentioned, they're more like, my life is more than this. This
Mhm.
pays the bills, and I'm very happy about it. Where the older generation, it's all about this is my life and building their identities around this work, such that if someone says, like, I will get to this tomorrow or some other time, they're just like, you're not serious with your work.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like it's personally offensive to them. And it's also, but it's thinking about millennials, right? I'm not going to assume what generation you fall into.
Millennial.
Millennial, okay. Like in our group, we were told you go to college, you get a degree, you like go to a job, you're going to go up the ranks, it's going to be great. In our like time span, we've had COVID, we've had, cost of living has gone like ridiculous, right? Like the idea of someone owning a house, like I'm very lucky I own my home, but like that's not something that a lot of us can see. We've had so many layoffs. So it's like we were promised all these things and now we're actually confronted with the reality of our situation and we're like, I think we were gypped because I'm still paying off my student loans. I did all the work. I've been laid off and I can't get a job despite all the credentials that I have. So, it context is so important and I think there has to also be an acknowledgement of there is resentment, right? Because while we bought into, the boomers bought into this idea that like this is our identity, this is what we're meant to do, we've kind of seen or we've just been disillusioned because we're like, oh, actually it's not true at all. Like we've done all of this and now we have a generation of people that are super anxious, really depressed, completely lost when we lose our jobs. And then you have this younger generation that's like, well, I never bought into it and I refuse to.
Which is great. Because in our generation, if I can just rant about that as well,
Please.
um, there was a lot of emphasis on going to university, getting that degree. Now, one, there's the money aspect of getting that degree, but there's also the time aspect where we could have, and I don't know about like your parents but my parents, were very strict about being focused on your studies, getting good grades, okay? Once you do that, you're guaranteed like your future will be a problem, you know? And then you do all that and you just focus the 4 years, 6 years for me, plus a master's, you know? And then it's like, oh wow, you enter into the workplace and it's just different. I never learned how to interact with people of different cultures, people of different orientation, and those kinds of things that you learn on the job. Like this is just team dynamics, but the work itself, my degree did not really prepare me for the actual work. So it was a lot of time spent to do a lot of unlearning and being adaptable while the world was also happening, geopolitics, COVID, recessions, everything. It's just like, oh wow, what world is this that we're living in? But yeah, I just had to rant a little bit about that.
It's so
Uh,
true. It's so true. I always say I was a straight A student. My parents were the same. They were like, you have to be a straight A student, then you're going to go to an Ivy League. Didn't get into an Ivy League, even though I got straight A's. And then I got into the workforce and I was like, oh, they're not going to give me a grade. Like, you're not successful in business because you can just take rules and repeat it. Like, just no. You have to be a strategic thinker. You have to question things. And those are things that I didn't learn in school. And I got into the real world, a working context. And I was, yeah, I was really shook.
yes, surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. Well, your work with D&I, right? It often than not, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I have observed working for different organizations and speaking to people in different organizations, the work unfortunately usually gets reduced to workshops and
Mm.
trainings, right? And people sit through them because maybe it's an hour's training, 2 days, half a day, whatever the time frame, right? But after that, it's just gone. Um, how do you think it can be more continuous? Like, how can it be a continuous work? Because that's what it really is, you know? Yeah.
It's a really good question. It's a big question. I think part of it is recognizing, again, that you can have a series of workshops, you can have a series of trainings, but it's how are we taking those learnings and giving people opportunity to act them out in real life or giving them opportunities to integrate it into their work, integrate it into their thinking. And when it comes to that, it's about, again, creating space for people to try things and to fail. So it's like, okay, fine. If you have 2 or 3 trainings on intergenerational, workplace dynamics, are you willing to then, have a feedback session and, ask for ways that we can adopt the way that we work so that it can accommodate both styles? Are you willing to invest in, different messaging platforms so that people with different needs in terms of communication can do that? Are you willing to trial doing, different kind of working dynamics in terms of people can work from home or people, can work from anywhere around the world? Like I think where we see the gap a lot of the times with trainings and sessions is that you do the training in the session, the person gives you ideas and gives you recommendations. And then once you look at the recommendations and recognize, oh, there's probably going to be some growing pains in implementing this. It might cost us a bit more money. I'm not used to it. It's like outside of my control. Then you see people kind of drop it off. And it's like, if it's uncomfortable, that means you're doing the right thing. If challenging the idea that the only way that people can work effectively is if they're in the office 5 days a week, if that's the only way that you think that people can work well, then yeah, we need to challenge that because we've gone through a pandemic. We've seen that people can work in different places. Also, we are like employees are adults. There needs to be a level of respect and recognizing if someone comes to you with a recommendation or wants to try things, like we deserve to give people the opportunity to trial these. So I think it's a combination of learning and implementation. And then it's also a layer of recognizing that there needs to be some self responsibility and also taking those learnings and applying them to, outside of the work context. Because yes, work does take up a lot of our lives, but we are so much more than work. And if we're being honest, a lot of the reasons why we're in this context or in this situation of the workplace is because of systemic dynamics that go beyond work, right? Um, and so it's also recognizing that a lot of this learning, it's not just specific to like where I clock in 9 to 5. It's how I adapt and engage with people outside of that as well. And again, that requires, you know, reading books, like going or watching YouTube videos, however you want to learn. We have so many ways of learning and getting information, but it's about having that responsibility, taking that responsibility to do your own learning as well. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And it speaks to your mission of accountability because as you hold other people accountable, you also have to hold yourself accountable to your work.
Definitely.
Yeah, I've been stalking you on LinkedIn a little bit.
Well,
Um, I'm so proud of it because it's great. There's so many posts that you've had that made me stop and think. I'm like, wow, this is great. Like, I didn't know about this post that the Washington Post did, where it was in December 2025, and they called D&I the diversity of a correction in the workplace. What
mm.
do you? And you spoke a little bit about it, but I would like to highlight that. Like, what was your response to that framing?
I think we like to find, again, as I said before, as a society, we're not really good at taking accountability for where we've, messed up. And I think there was this, D&I has become a scapegoat for a lot of the woes that we're seeing in the world. And I think there is some truth in that. When it comes to D&I, we've tried to position D&I as the savior and the solution to a lot of things in the world, and it's not. But I also think that it's not diversity, equity, and inclusion itself that's the problem. Because if we're thinking about it, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is the foundation for culture that we engage with outside of the workplace, right? Like, um, when we're looking at, the Super Bowl and Bad Bunny performing in all Spanish, like that is D&I, right? Like that is us creating a space where it's like we don't need the major, like we don't always have to have the majority be what is like the point of reference or what's considered normal or American. Like we need to have a diversity of perspective experiences to make the world rich, to learn, to grow. And I think what's happened is because we have some people that are like, oh, our business isn't doing well. Let's turn to D&I. Let's do these performative things. Let's put up a black square. Let's do 2 trainings and think that it's going to solve years of systemic oppression. And then when it doesn't, we're like, oh, well, that was on it. Um, so I think D&I has become a bit of a scapegoat. And I do think that there is some responsibility on behalf of like D&I practitioners where there was this thing about like, if I come in and do a training, I can change your workplace culture. No, you can't. Like there needs to be multiple training. There needs to be understanding what are the pain points of your organization, real conversations. Like when you're coming in and just trying to glaze over issues and say that like one person, one training is going to solve it. Yeah, we're setting ourselves up for failure. I also think with D&I, we focused a lot, there was a lot of focus on the quantitative and not the qualitative. And again, I loved your interview with Lily where it was just like it's a fine line between representation and tokenism, right? Like
Mhm.
you, just because you add in a black woman or you add in a black man to a board, that's, I mean, okay, that's one step, but that's not it. Because again, you could have a black man that's like, pro Trump, like super conservative. Again, we're not a monolith. Black people aren't a monolith, women aren't a monolith, queer people aren't a monolith. And so I think again, it's like we there was an unintentional kind of like shifting into like tick box exercises, or like D&I is when you have parity 50-50 women and men. And it's like, but we need to drill deeper into that. What about diverse women? What about women with disabilities? What are these women talking about? Because, when I always think about this, like when we talk about the suffragette woman or the suffragette movement or the feminist movement, it was really anti-black woman. That is the whole reason why we started talking about intersectional identity, because these spaces for women were really, really white and anti, Black women, anti women from different backgrounds. So again, it's that nuance. It's not just one size fits all. And I think in an effort to try to make it more mainstream and to try to get people to buy into it, there was this kind of, oh, let's just package this up really nicely, sell this, sell that, come in for a quick talk, do a Black History Month programming, and let's say that we've solved things. And so I think it did us a disservice, but I also think that it's been an opportunity because it's had us really reflect on, like, what is the work that we are trying to do? What are the changes that we are trying to make? How can I, as a D&I practitioner, think more holistically about how I approach these trainings, these conversations, the work that I'm doing? Um, so yeah, I guess I just, that article, it was just so interesting because again, it's like we're always looking to kind of scrape accountability. And that article, I was just like, this is what a prime example. Now D&I is like this terrible term. We can't even touch it. People are scraping their websites. And it's like, it's not really D&I that's the issue though.
No, no. And I also read somewhere or spoke to someone who said perhaps we should shy away from using the word diversity, equity, and inclusion, but just do the work. What's your take on that?
I think I think there's a lot of validity to it. I'm a comms professional as my background, right? And language is important. Content is important, but sometimes we lean too much on the words, on the content, and we forget about the action. And that's why we get into those conversations about performative. It's like you can use the term D&I, JED&I, justice, equality, diversity, and inclusion, whatever terms you want. But if you're just using them and you're not doing the work, it's why we are seeing a D&I backlash, because people are quick to use the terms to claim allyship, to talk about, inclusion. But then when it comes to questioning about the actions, it's like, what do you mean? I just wrote it down. It's like, that is the problem. Um, Words are important, but actions are much more important. And that's where we see the gap a lot of the times. And then you find these organizations or these people that co-opt these terms, and then it's just what was intended as something that was really positive has just been completely misaligned, because I don't want to say bad actors, that sounds really dramatic, but you just have disingenuous folks that are like bandying these words about, and it's like you don't actually know, you're not actually doing it any service because you're just saying it. You don't embody it. You don't even know how to embody it. You don't know the actions to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Debating semantics leads nowhere if we're not doing the work, because it's just a lot of time spent to tire everyone out, and then we don't even know why we're arguing in the first place, and people are still being excluded, people are still being oppressed, and all the things that we're trying to solve by trying to fit it in words, you know?
Yeah,
So it's
definitely.
really good. Well, you did win the PRCA Trailblazer of the Year. Congratulations. And yes, and you do sit on their Race and Ethnicity Equity Board.
Mhm.
What does it feel like to be recognized as a leader in this space, in this exact moment when there's so much backlash?
Uh, I don't know. Sometimes it feels a bit surreal because I think I'm someone who's always like, there's more to be done. And I could have done more. There's more to be done, and I could have done more. And so I think sometimes when I look back on everything that I've achieved and all the work that I've been able to do, I'm just a bit like surprised because I'm just like, oh, like, I never thought that I would be at this point, but I feel really grateful that I've had the opportunities that I've had. And I guess I feel really proud. The thing that I'm most proud of is when people come up to me and they're just like, I appreciate what you said. It really resonated with me. I've never had someone able to articulate the experience that I have in a way that really resonated with me. It feels really safe talking to you. I feel like I can talk to you about things. Like that for me is really the purpose or why I'm doing this work. Um, because I want to create a space, or I want to provide that feeling of support that I wasn't able to get when I was coming up in my career. Um, so I mean, I guess, yeah, it feels surreal in that like people actually are recognizing that and to be celebrated for it. Yeah, I feel really grateful. Sometimes I'm like, ooh, I don't know why, but then I'm like, no, I've been doing a lot of work to try to get here, and yeah, it's really nice.
Oh, that's good. You have been doing the work, and it has to pay off at some point, you know?
Yes, I hope so. Even if it's like, again, just having people come up and be like, I want to do what you do, when I grow up or whatever. Like that, yeah, that's really powerful.
Yeah, it's amazing. And again, goes back to representation because people see your work. You know, you might think they're not looking, but people see it. Um, well, we're coming towards the end, and I was just wondering if there's someone that's listening to you and they work at a company where D&I feels a bit more performative or non-existent, um, or perhaps they've tried a few things, but nothing has really worked or shifted. What's the one thing that you think they should do without formal authority, right? To sort of start steering the needle into it being actually inclusive and accountable?
Yeah, big question. I would say having conversations with
Mm,
folks within the organization. I think, you know, there sometimes a bit too much focus on kind of like surveys within organizations, but surveys usually only get into the numbers. They don't get into the context, which we've been talking a lot about
mm,
in nuance. And so I think having conversations, having forums, whether it's like, you know, informal coffees one-on-one with other folks in the organization to get a sense of what are you seeing, where are you feeling, unsupported or unheard, what are things that you want to see change in the organization. That's usually a really solid step, because then you actually get an understanding of how people feel, where there are challenges, where the barriers are, and then you can start to make a case for this isn't just a matter of hearsay. We've been having conversations with people in the organizations that feel XYZ, and we really need to start addressing this, and making the case for how the business can address it in a way that's impactful. um I know it's funny because I said it's not just about words, but words are a powerful starting point. But that's it.
mm.
It's a starting point. Then we need to follow it with action.
Yeah, that's good. Starting point, you know?
It's not just the start and we have the conversation and we end, because then, it takes a lot to be open and honest about your experience, especially when it's not positive. And for someone to kind of trust you with that and open themselves up to it and then see nothing happens, like that's a slap in the face as well. And so it's,
Mhm.
if you're willing to create that space for people, it's then taking on the responsibility of what you've shared with me today. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to do what I can to start addressing some of these challenges and issues.
Yeah, totally agree with that. You've also said that creating inclusive cultures requires both stable foundations and flexible ones to move, as you've previously mentioned. And in a case where someone is trying to do the work, like you referenced, them starting a conversation, then let's imagine this lands with someone who genuinely would like to build an inclusive team. What would you say they should do? Let's say they are the receiver of the message, like we could do better, and they genuinely want to be more inclusive. What would you say should be something that they do?
Hmm. It's a really good question. I think it's about finding this work can be really isolating, and it can be really mentally taxing. It's just really heavy work, right? Especially if you are a person with some diverse background doing this work, it feels even doubly so because you're not only trying to speak on behalf of the organization and create space for people, but you're trying to create space for yourself, which is very personal. But it doesn't always have to be done alone. So what I would say to that person is there are likely other people in the organization who feel similarly and want to do that work too, and trying to partner with them to kind of approach the business to be like, we really see that there's an issue here. This is someone else who also is really passionate about taking this work forward. You know, I you can only get so far on your own, and I think there's just something to be said about kind of building that community, whether it's within your organization or, in a wider context, to try to share that load, build out or brainstorm ideas for how to make meaningful impact within the organization, and in a slow and steady way. So yeah, what I would say to that person is, in your conversations, try to find other people who are just as passionate and want to do or committed to doing this work, and partner up um, to make that change.
Yeah, they say it takes a village.
It takes a village.
Yeah,
100.
yeah. Um, well, I've really enjoyed talking to you, and we can go on and on and on and on, because I was trying to make sure I get as much knowledge, context, everything out of you. But oh my God, there's just so much time in the world. But I'm wondering, a little sort of fire round.
Okay.
Is there one book that has changed or influenced the way you think about inclusion or the world in general?
Why I'm No Longer Talking About Race was a really powerful, it was a heavy book. It took me a while to get through it. But I think that was the book that made me realize that sometimes we can fall into this trap of thinking that people, ourselves included, are monoliths. And that's a result of kind of like the system, right? Like the system is doing exactly what they built it to do. But reading that book made me realize that the Black experience, or the experience of, people from diverse background, is so diverse in and of itself. Like there are different trigger points, there are different manifestations, but the impact is the same, right? Making us small, making us disenfranchised, like, or, disenfranchising us. And so it really made me think about how I could approach this work in a way that takes into account the nuance, the diversity, and challenged my like my binary kind of just like really strict thinking, and broadened it out a lot. So that book was really, really powerful. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really like that book as well. I read it a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And sometimes with these books and this work, it's so heavy,
It's so heavy.
because a lot of it is also lived experience.
Mhm.
And it's just a reminder. And yeah, it was one of those books that made me think, wow, this is an amazing book. And I hope more people can get to read, because sometimes when you're doing this work, people always question, like, you can't be serious. Like, it's not really like that. Is it
That
really?
so long ago, and I'm like, okay, let me bring up the receipts.
You saw that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. But as we close off, where do you see Anchor and Flow being in the future? Let's just say the future, because this future moves so fast.
You know, um, I hope that I'm continuing to work with brands that I'm really excited and passionate about, um, that want to make a positive impact as well. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I think that's really it. Like, you don't go into this work for the money. Like I went into this work because I want to feel as though I'm doing something that makes a difference. Like I said before, whether it's a small one, whether it's a big one that lives on, after me, I just want to be able to look back and say that when the world felt so scary and broken, I did something to try to make
Mm,
it sense.
that is so powerful. Like you're doing your part. You've done your part. Yeah. Um, okay, now this is where I get into the Bible. I'm a Christian. I'm just
Oh, let's go. Preach, girl, preach.
you say that, it just reminded me of the part where the Bible talks about how we'll all be held accountable with this life that we've been given. Like, what did you do? What did you do with the talents that I gave you? We don't want to be like, Master, you're so scary. I remember what you did to them people a long time ago. I was like, no, I would do nothing. So, you're doing your part, which is amazing.
Thank you, and you're doing yours.
Oh, thanks. And one last question. If we get it right with the work that you're doing and move from policy to practice, what does the workplace look like? Let's say in 2030 or whatever future you can think of. Paint us that picture.
I think that workplace inherently looks more diverse because we're creating a space where people, whether you have a disability, whether you're a carer, whether you're a mom, um, whether you're older, younger, it's a space that caters to all those different needs um, and requirements. I also think it's a more creative and thriving space, right? Because when you give people the space to be themselves, to work in a way that makes sense for them, it just opens up so many opportunities to think creatively, to think outside of the box, um, to challenge, constructively, to ask questions, and to rethink like the status quo. Um, so yeah, I'd like to think that in 2030, if we can get it right, we're creating more vibrant, um, productive, and successful organizations that can truly say that like our success is a result of the diversity of people. And when I say diversity, I mean in the broadest of terms, the skill sets, the thinking, the background, the experience that we honor and we cherish, and we foster a space where they can bring that to the fore, without fear of being judged or whatever.
I like that. I like that you say diversity in its broadest form as well, because it's heavy. It's loaded with so many angles, so many aspects to it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. On that note, where can people find you and what's next for you?
So you can find me at anchorandflow.com, 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 or you can find me in my musings on LinkedIn, um, Whitney K. Simon. Um, and what's next for Anchor and Flow? I mean, I'd love to be able to do some work with like US organizations. I know it's a bit of a tricky landscape, but you know, to be able to work with organizations in that space and to really help make a difference in a space where my family still is, my friends are still there, would be really fantastic. Um, and again, would just make me feel like even if I'm not there on the ground, I'm still doing my part for my friends and my family that are there. So yeah.
Awesome. That is so good. Any final words before we close off?
Mm,
To
I
the
guess
person that wants to do the work that you're doing.
I guess what I would say is, again, the world is super heavy. I'm not going to sit here and say that like there aren't times where I question, am I doing anything? Does this work even matter? But all it takes is to touch one person. And that in and of itself is so powerful and is such a win. And so even if it's like your neighbor, your coworker, your best friend's boyfriend or whatever, like being able to kind of change and inspire or impact one person is a great place to start. And it doesn't have to be a formal workshop. It doesn't have to be, a panel. It can just start with a conversation. Start with a conversation.
Start with the conversation. I think that's what it should be. Whitney, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Girl podcast. I've enjoyed talking to you. I hope to continue seeing the work that you're doing. I'm supporting you. I'm rooting for you. Just all the best.
Thank you so much, Gertrude. And it's been an honor to be a guest on your podcast and right back at you. I am championing you. I can't wait to see all the amazing conversations you continue to have. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. What stayed with me the most from the conversation with Whitney is her calm yet authoritative presence on this very important topic. It's that the work is not messy and there's no final destination where we can say we figured it out. But change doesn't have to be massive for it to matter. If you can impact one person, one conversation, and one environment, that's powerful. Whether it's in the workplace, in your team, or you just want to show up for the people around you, it starts with you and it starts small. I'm Gertrude, and this has been the Tech Girl Podcast. Until next time, start the conversation.